Hello everyone, my name is Stanley St. Bros, and today we're going to be talking about A New England Nun written by Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. Now, before I go into the summary, analysis, and review of this work, please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and or comment so that the channel can continue to grow. Now, in this work by Freeman, we meet an individual by the name of Louisa. Louisa is this woman that is engaged and she lives all alone in her house. She's lived alone for 14 years, that we learn within the story. And she's engaged to this man by the name of Joe, and Joe is away. He's trying to make a fortune for himself so he can get married to Louisa and they can be together happily ever after. The beginning of this short story, it seems great. Louisa is she pretty much, her life hasn't gone perfect. We know that there's a few deaths in her family. Her mother's gone, and she's pretty much all alone. She doesn't really have any family members left. It's just her, and she's just waiting to get married to start a family of her own. When we're first introduced to her, she's like this very clean woman. She has an apron for cooking, for cleaning, for everything, for yard work, for gardening. She uses the good china, which is very weird because in her community, in her town, people don't use their good china every day. It's only when you have special guests that come to your house. But Louisa, she's a very meticulous woman. She loves to eat, and the way that she eats, it's almost like the food will never disappear because she eats very daintily, or she kind of like nibbles at her food. She's kind of like the person that has like the palate to taste food, not to devour it. In my own perspective, I think she might have OCD or a form of OCD, because she has an impulse to clean things and to keep things in order. And throughout the short story, like for instance, there's this scene where her and Joe are sitting face to face, and he messes up her books, and she quickly like picks up the books that he messed up and put them in the direct order. It's not like alphabetical order or anything like that. It's just there's a certain way that she likes her books stacked. It's not even a bookshelf. It's like a few books that are on the table, and Joe messes them up, and she puts them back in the order that she likes. And he even says, why do they need to be in this specific order? So in my own personal perspective, I think Louisa might have OCD to the point where everything has to be kept in line, in order, and not bothered. Like, I mean, she cleans and scrubs and cleans everything the way she wants it. She loves to sew. Sometimes she unsews things so that she can sew them back together. She has a pet bird and a dog by the name of Caesar. And in her community, she's known to be quiet. She's a gardener. She's just this woman that's all to herself. She's not living with anybody. She doesn't have money, but she's doing well enough to take care of herself. She has a garden to feed herself. She has this house that's been left to her, and she's all alone in the world. And we're just told that this is all in preparation. She's not going to be alone forever. That she's waiting for Joe, and Joe eventually comes, and it's kind of sad because Louisa and Joe, they're supposed to get married and start a family of their own. But Joe is not enamored with the Louisa. There's no love, there's no passion, there's no romance. I mean, he comes to see her a few times a week, a couple times a week, and they just sit face to face, talk about, just common things that two strangers would talk about, like the weather and little facts about the family here and there. And her and Joe, they don't seem to love each other. They are engaged. Now, this piece was written a very long time ago, so when people got engaged, they meant it, they kept it. There was no breaking the promise or the oath that you took. Pretty much the plan is that, Joe has come back, and he and Louisa, they're going to get married, and Louisa's going to be moving to Joe's house, and she's going to be taking care of Joe's mother, cleaning the house, taking care of the house, making, carrying kids and birthing kids for Joe, and pretty much being a host when Joe has guests over, and pretty much the typical housewife of the past. That was the future for Louisa. But she didn't seem that it didn't seem that that's what she wanted throughout the short story, and it's not what she wanted for her life. If you pay attention to this work, several times we see the name of Lily Dyer come up, and Lily Dyer is a very interesting character because she shows up a lot in this piece, and Louisa keeps asking about her, and later we learn that Joe and Lily Dyer, they like each other. They're interested in each other. You can even say they actually love each other. There's some passion between them. But Joe, this is a time where people kept their word and they stick to what they said they would do, So since Joe made a promise to Louisa that, he would marry her 14 years ago, when he comes back to town and Lily Dyer tells him that she's in love with him and she wants to be with him, Joe says, I can't break my promise to Louisa. And Lily Dyer says, if you broke your promise to Louisa, I wouldn't want anything to do with you. Now, this is a conversation that they actually had out in the open when they explained all of this to each other. And Louisa was actually somehow near to them on this public space and this public area where there's greenery going, where there's there's a form of nature around them, and Louisa hears Lily Dyer and Joe together talking about how they do like each other, but since Joe already made this promise to Louisa, they don't want to break that promise that Joe's supposed to get married to Louisa. And what's crazy is that Lily Dyer tells Joe that she's in love with him pretty much a week before he gets married to Louisa. So now Joe, he's keeping his word. He's going to get married to Louisa, but at the same time, he doesn't really love Louisa. He's just doing it because, his promise. So there's a lot going on in this short story, and one thing you need to pick up right away from this short story is that Louisa, from all of the reasons and how she's described and how her thought process is displayed, is that she doesn't really want to get married to Joe, and Joe doesn't want to get married to her. When she hears Lily Dyer and Joe professing their love to each other and that he's only trying to keep his promise, Louisa pretty much walks home quietly, and everybody goes their separate ways. And next week we know that Joe's supposed to get married, so Louisa pretty much, thinks it over, and she breaks off her engagement with Joe because Louisa loves her life. Being alone, cleaning up after herself, and taking care of Caesar, her dog, taking care of her bird. She loves her life how it is, just alone, not married, and not attached to anybody. And so pretty much you could see that throughout the entire short story because Louisa keeps asking about Lily Dyer, and she even says within the short story that Lily Dyer is a beautiful girl. And we're even told that Lily Dyer is taking care of Joe's mom within the short story. So there was already a bond between Lily Dyer and Joe, and Lily Dyer and Joe's mother. So Lily Dyer was already in place to get married to Joe. I mean, it was pretty much set in stone that Lily Dyer is a perfect match for Joe. They like each other. Joe's mother gets along with Lily Dyer, and Lily Dyer would have no problem taking care of Joe's home and hosting Joe's guests and just being a wife to him and making kids for Joe. It seems like that wouldn't be a problem for her. I mean, Lily Dyer even says within the short story that if Joe doesn't marry her, if she doesn't end up with Joe, that she'll never fall in love again and just spend the rest of her life alone. So all of this gets said, and eventually what happens is, Louisa breaks off her engagement with Joe. Joe says, I'm forever indebted to you. I'm here if you ever need me. And Joe goes off and it's pretty much kind of suggested that he'll end up with Lily Dyer, and Lily Dyer will take care of his mother, and they will live happily ever after. And Louisa will live happily ever after because she didn't want to get married. She lived successfully for 14 years on her own. She loved her life. In the morning after she broke off her engagement with Joe, she understood that she'll never ever have kids or get married in her life because she just broke off her engagement. And she's okay with that. She loves that because, I mean, she did not want to be with Joe. And one way we know this is because every time Joe came to her house, her bird would pretty much fight against the bars of its cage. And it's kind of like every time he entered her house, he was this unwelcome, this elephant in the room, this unwelcome being. I mean, there's a sentence within the work that says his presence, his body, who he is, took up too much space, or it took up the whole house, took up the whole room. Now, he's a human being. He's not gonna, fill up the entire house, but it's just, he was something that bothered Louisa's system, her way of life, and the bird, felt uncomfortable. It whenever Joe came to the house, it kind of like broke up from its slumber, and it was never at ease when Joe was in the house. And she felt happy and free because their engagement is off, and now she was numbering her days like a New England nun. She's going to spend out the rest of her life taking care of Caesar until he dies, and she's going to live happily, tending to her garden, eating her, her biscuits, and just living on her own and living by herself. Now, for most people, this would seem sad, and this would seem like something that no one would want, but everybody's different in this world. Some people want to live alone. Some people don't want to get married. Some people don't want to have kids. And Louisa is this nun. It has nothing to do with religion. She's happy on her own, living her life on her own, reading her books on her own, eating on her own, and taking care of her pets. And that is pretty much freedom, and it's amazing and wonderful for her. And she is, happy beyond measures just being by herself and living out the rest of her life alone. It's freeing. And that's pretty much how the story ends of Louisa's stories. And it's just her counting how normal her life is going to be in terms of her days are going to be the same every day. She's going to wake up, clean her house, take care of her pets, sew, cook for herself, and just live in her community. And she's going to be happy, and that is perfect for her. Another thing that came up is that Joe wanted to release Caesar, and Caesar has a bad reputation in the community because Caesar bit someone when he was like a puppy, and everybody's was afraid of Caesar ever since then. And Louisa did not want Joe to let go or let Caesar go wild and go free. So Caesar will never be unchained. The bird will never lose its mind ever again. And in a way, everything ends up well for Louisa, and again, she's completely happy. In terms of analysis, in terms of a deeper meaning within this short story, the story there's a Bible story depicted within this work. It's Esau and Jacob when Esau sold his birthright to Jacob for food, and Louisa and Lily Dyer are kind of the same position because Louisa pretty much sold her birthright, which is marriage here. She sold her birthright, which is marriage to Lily Dyer, and she's okay with it because what she gained is freedom and her own independence. Because as soon as she married Joe, her life would be pretty much his. He would command her. He would do whatever he wants with her. Because during the time this piece was written, men were the head. Men pretty much controlled the household and everything that happened. In the household with their wives, with their kids. But in this circumstance, Louisa gets to be her own person and just live her own life. So Louisa does not hate Lily Dyer. She does not hate anyone. She's actually quite happy. There's a little scene where Lily Dyer passes in front of Louisa's house at the end of the work, and Louisa doesn't feel bad or hatred or angry. She's pretty much happy because Lily Dyer gets her one true love, and she gets her one true love, which is her independence and her freedom. So it's a very important and significant ideal. And another thing that's really significant about this work is that it's female independence. It's pretty much a self identity. Identity is very important here because Louisa gets to keep her identity, because if she got married to Joe, she would lose her identity. She gets to keep her identity and gets to keep her own person. Lily Dyer fits into that whole stay-at-home mom kind of role. It's not a bad role, but it's a common standard role in society where a pretty woman gets married to this Joe that has a fortune enough to take care of a family, and she fits into a role of being a mother, taking care of the home, taking care of Joe's mother, and that's not it for Louisa, and she's perfectly happy how her life is. Although most people would consider it to just be sad to live, pretty much all of your life alone. That's the story. That's what's significant about it in my perspective. In terms of review, in terms of should you read this or not, it is a good read. I think the way it's described, the way that it brings in the Bible, it doesn't bring it in the sense of her being extremely religious, because yes, she is called a New England nun, but she is not deeply religious. This is not a person that's like praying 20 hours a day. Louisa is just, she's a nun in the sense of she's staying by herself. The way that her character is described is it's pretty much she's never slept with anybody. She's never had a boyfriend. She's never been with anybody. She was only engaged to Joe, and that got broken off. So she's going to spend the rest of her life alone, kind of like a nun would, without, being with a guy, a man. And that's her life. That's her, her path. And the same way that her life is going to have routine, because she pretty much tells us she's going to do the same thing every day. So her life really resembles the life of a nun. So it's a good read. You should read it yourself if you're interested. The way that it's described, the way that the imagery is depicted within this work, it's very interesting. It's very engaging. That's all I had to say. Those are my perspective on this work. Please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and or comment, and I'll see you guys in my next video.